What are you going to be doing when this show comes out?
Probably reading about data center REITs and private company financing of the build out of data center REITs. I say that only half jokingly because that to me is probably the biggest risk as we turn the calendar and go into 2026 as a broad investment theme. It's beyond Oracle, which I've beaten the drum to death on the show about. It's more so focused on the neo cloud space and all of these creative debt financing structures that have helped to prop up the data center build out.
I have not heard the neo cloud before. So for me and the rest of the listeners who I know the hyperscaler, those are the big dogs. That's Amazon Web Services putting a bunch of data centers out there that you can rent for your cloud computing needs. What is the neo cloud?
Yeah, so think CoreWeave. That's probably the best example I can give you of what a neo cloud technically is. But there's a bunch of these companies out there. Applied Digital is another one that had a tough time for like a year and a half actually getting a tenant in its data center that it built in North Dakota because basically it decided to build for the wrong side of the equation. They were building for training, which you don't really need to be close to proximity to a populous area for training because Muhammad will come to the mountain in that case. But for things like inference, which is the actual thinking and doing layer of Gen AI, people actually want the data center to be closer to where its customers are using the apps that are asking the questions and the queries because it'll return the answer faster. And it turns out North Dakota is not necessarily the best place to have that kind of a thing housed. And so anyway, a year and a half, Applied Digital's trying to find a tenant for this data center. They talked to XAI and Elon Musk. They talked to Satya Nadella and Microsoft. They talked to, I think, Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon Web Services. Nobody wants to use this thing, but they already have taken out like $100 million to put shovels in the dirt. They built an entire community, like new houses were built, grocery store, like all kind of stuff around this premise that build it and they will come. And then they didn't come. And that is the concern that I have, is that there's hundreds of those happening underneath the surface right now. All these data centers that are being built, economies that are being propped up in small towns across the country that come crashing to a halt when Amazon Web Services says, you know what, we don't actually want that. We like Texas better because they're not actually on the hook for any of the financing. They're not on the hook for any of the real estate. They're not on the hook for any of the NVIDIA GPUs that were committed to and thrown into this facility. And so to me, that is a risk that stops this train in its tracks.
So we're talking about risks going into the new year. And this is, the data center build out is getting mounds of investment right now. And this is something where every single real estate build out in the past that investors have gotten excited about, in my view, in my memory, has resulted in overbuilding. That is inevitable. It seems to me that it is inevitable at some point when people get really excited about a certain real estate area. I've talked about on the show before with apartments in the Sun Belt region, in Denver, Colorado, places like Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, everyone's going to move to the Sun Belt because remote work is here to stay. Maybe not so much. And now a lot of those stocks get beat up. What's different in what you're describing, though, is ultimately the big tech companies get to walk away and say, oh, we're fine, because that was a part of a holding company that has the debt on those on that balance sheet. That's not my problem necessarily. We were just leasing it.
Well, and then, not even necessarily before they even have to ink the deal. So all of this is being done on spec is the part that's bothering me the most. So a company, Fermi, for example, has a LOI from Amazon Web Services to build a data center to suit Amazon as its core client. Then they go out and find financing to develop the site on the promise that once it's built exactly the way Amazon wants it to be built, then and only then will Amazon ink the 20-year lease, the 30-year lease, whatever, to take up that real estate and pay them rent. But they have all these caveats for how and when they can walk away and throw that LOI in the trash. So hundreds of millions of dollars for each one of these data centers is being borrowed basically on spec. That is the problem that I see coming for all of these companies. It's the amount of borrowing and it's the lack of strings attached. Anyway,
for my winter break.
Please tell me it's something more sunny than that.
I'm going to Australia to visit some family. So I will be getting on a very long plane ride. And right now, for these next few days, I will not be looking into data centers built on spec for large tech companies that may or may not pay them. I am trying to organize my film festival for a 15-hour plane ride.
I'm glad somebody knows how to take time off.
So I can numb my mind a little bit while I'm trying to brace through that amount of time sitting in a chair looking at a screen in front of me. I have done it before. I forget that I am capable of doing it. So I have to go back to this like I listened to David Blaine on the Joe Rogan Experience talking about how he did the buried alive stunts where he would just be in like a block of ice or buried alive for days at a time. And he would say he would do extreme like fractions. Like I'm 20% of the way to 20%. Then I will get to 50%. So I can constantly feel progress. And I listened to that and I'm like, we're pretty much the same person as I sit on a comfortable plane, unable to move for about 15 hours. So right now I'm mentally training for that. And when the show comes out, I will be far, far away from my computer, hopefully.
Good for you. I've never done a flight like that, nor do I believe I'm capable of doing a flight like that.
Well, the good news is that once you're on it, you have no option. like you say you're not capable of doing it, but once they shove your rear end on the plane, what are you going to do if you decide you're not capable of it? There's one option and it's really extreme.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think one of the big storylines as we get into the new year, it's going to be affordability. It's going to be data centers, as you mentioned. I guess those are two storylines. And also I want to talk about some sort of reflections of the economy from Las Vegas to boxing and even sugar babies, what they're saying and what that reveals about the American economy. Let's get into it. So Malcolm, one of the big surprises over the past couple of years has been this narrative transformation, I would say, which was that in 2022, every single economist that I could I can't think of many of them. I was seeing so many articles from large economists at large financial institutions saying a recession is coming in 2023. And now you don't hear any of that, but everyone seems to be worried about these AI and speculative booms, specifically as you mentioned, in AI real estate. And I don't know, just as we start to look forward to 2026, how are you feeling about the state of the economy? Any rolling recessions or real recession, not even real, rolling or widespread recessions on your mind?
Yeah, there have been a number of rolling recessions underneath the surface, but this market's been held up so well because of AI, right? We've talked about it ad nauseum. I just got done figuring out a way to throw it into another conversation that had nothing to do with it. But the reason that matters is because underneath the surface, real estate, commercial real estate specifically, has had a recession. Healthcare, biotech, those industries have had a recession. Financials, to some degree, depending on how large the bank we're talking about, has had a recession in the last 2-year window, let's call it. The reason that we didn't really notice is because the Mag 7 was taking everything else up and to the right. And so if you look at the equal weight index, the S&P equal weight, you can see where these ebbs and flows have happened. And so all that to say, I think maybe we have to use different metrics to understand what a recession looks like now. It's not necessarily the 2 negative quarters of GDP that back up against each other that tell us that a recession happened. Maybe it's more so sector specific or something else, because AI alone, the build out of AI, the capital expenditures related to all things AI, are attributable to about 50% of our GDP growth for the year. So if you strip those out, yes, there is probably a recession that happened last year or this year. But you can't strip those out because they're all anybody cares about right now. They're changing the way we think, live, work. So all that to say, like, I think maybe the binary recession indicator, the binary recession calculation that we were taught in school might have to go out the window.
I think recessions won't even be the big, like, is a recession coming or not, be even the big storyline. I think it's going to be affordability. That's going to be the biggest political, in some ways, we talked about it with Hannah Horvath a little bit, but in some ways, that was a big reason Trump got elected. I also think part of it, I think immigration was the other big storyline. But I think as we get into those two go together. And as we get into the midterms this year, that is going to be, That's going to be the drumbeat for the Democrats, right? Hey, if you put us back in, we're going to make things more affordable with lower cost of healthcare and maybe even grocery prices if we can do anything on that, housing. And I think that their messaging on that, may need improvement, but also B, it's going to be the only thing you hear about this year from the blue team.
I think from both teams.
Really?
I think from a messaging perspective, Republicans have also picked up the mantle. It's the reason that you see, I think 50 or so Congress people have already announced that they're not going to be running again for a re-election. And these are people that are in their 40s and 50s that you would imagine would want to cling to power for the next 40 years like their predecessors. But they're getting out of the way. And I think it's because they recognize that they don't have an answer for affordability. They don't want to be asked about it at every turn. And also, they're so closely linked to the immigration fight, any of the other stuff that has happened in the online MAGA world, that they're like, let me just get out of the way now because like this wave is going to crush me. And so I think it's actually the red team and the blue team that are going to pick up the affordability conversation in different ways and start blaming each other for who's more responsible for the cost of eggs being $40 a carton.
Well, we'll get into this more on a future show because there's other topics I want to get to. The Michael Green there's a Substack finance writer named Michael Green. He's I believe a portfolio manager, hyper successful financial economic Substack. Made a lot of waves because he said for a family of four, the poverty line is $140,000 a year. He's since revised that down a little bit. And there was a lot of sort of outside dunking on that take because, hey, you used a high cost of living area. You assumed that people are paying full sticker price for daycare when they could be near a family. But I think the fact that he got that much attention on it also proves that there was some amount of truth ringing from it. There's a part of that article that got like no attention that I think is one of the most interesting things. And he lays out the case that a family of four in the United States is better off making about $30,000 a year than $65,000 a year. And in both of those cases, it is extraordinarily difficult to raise a family. I don't want to dismiss that. But he's basically saying that you've been declared poor at $30,000, so you get Medicaid, you get child care subsidies, you get food stamps. At $65,000, the state says, "Oh, you're middle class, you're wealthy. We're going to take all of those away." And when you add up the costs of all of those, that makes you essentially more on the financial edge and less well off than the person making, 50% of your income. And I don't think either party has an answer for that right now. And that may be a real problem going into the midterms and just structurally for the next decade. So
I agree that this is a much bigger conversation that we need to have to let this breathe because you just said a lot.
Sure.
I think
I'll say it again.
You're probably directionally accurate. I think that is scary that is directionally accurate, that I'm better off making $30,000 a year than I am making $65,000 a year anywhere in this country. Like, let me point that out too. It's not necessarily geographical. And then separately from that, I think that even though mathematically there's probably a ton to support that argument, most people wouldn't want to go in that direction, even if they come out better from a dollars and cents perspective. So there's a lot there.
We'll dig in. Stay tuned for this show. If you like listening to this kind of stuff, make sure you have subscribed to This Time is Different wherever you find your podcasts. Leaving a review also helps the show. There is a recession that you're going to hear about on no other finance and economics podcast that I want to get into. And I also think it is a reflection of the American economy. So even if you are not interested in the sport of boxing, and there's good reason to be totally uninterested in that sport, consider myself a former fan.
This episode is sponsored by Capital Area Planning Group. Capital Area Planning Group is a fiduciary wealth management firm that specializes in helping high net worth individuals and families navigate the complexities that come along with managing concentrated stock options, multiple income streams, and an ever-changing tax code. While our team of certified financial planners are well-versed in all things personal finance, our areas of expertise include equity compensation, estate planning, and multi-year tax planning. At Capital Area Planning Group, we believe in pricing transparency. That's why our fees are posted on our website, right alongside the various services we perform on behalf of our clients throughout the year. If you're tired of receiving the same cookie-cutter advice from your financial advisor, then don't wait. Reach out to us today at capgllc.com to experience a better approach to wealth management. Again, that web address is www.capgllc.com.
That is a industry, a business, a sport that is in a full-scale recession right now, a long-term structural decline. And I think that a great mirror of that, a great representation of how that is so, not great as in it was a great performance, but an accurate representation of how that was so, was the Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua event from a few weeks ago. Did you happen to catch any of that on Netflix?
I didn't even bother to watch, which tells you a lot. I watched him punch at Mike Tyson.
Yes.
I didn't even bother to watch this one.
Why didn't you tune into it? And you didn't tune into it, I would assume, because of your experience watching the Tyson event. If that were a great bout, do you think you would have tuned in this time?
Probably, because Netflix did a great production of that fight. They marketed it really well. They did the whole docu-series on both of those guys leading up to the fight. I actually watched 50% or so of both of them. I would have shown up to watch Jake Paul get punched in the face if the Tyson fight had gone off a little bit better. I think you're absolutely right.
This was supposed to be one of the biggest bouts of the year. Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua took place in Miami. When you think of a big ticket fight, whether it's UFC or whether it's boxing, just for a moment, the get in the door price, just to get in the arena, to sit up in the rafters, when you think of what that ticket might cost, I hope you would think that it may be around $500, maybe even $1,000 or more for something like a Conor McGregor coming out for a stunt boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. But I think what was really interesting about this event in Miami is the get in the door price was $31.
Wow.
If you wanted to go to one of the biggest four, and not just like, if you're a boxing purist listening to this, which there is a 10% chance there's one of you. I know it wasn't one of the most important fights for the sport, but it was in terms of popularity. You could have gotten in for $31, which to me says this is a sport that is in a full-blown crisis, and it's also a sport that has done it to itself for a few reasons. Go ahead.
When you say a full-blown crisis, are you looking at this as a temporary thing and it's indicative of a bigger, broader problem you're about to get into? Or are you saying it in terms of the sport is dead and gone and we've all moved on?
I think boxing will always have some amount of, there will always be like a big fight, maybe once or twice a year for the sport of boxing. There's a Ken Burns quote. I'm not a fan of boxing, but I find it irresistible. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, where if there's a big fight that causes people to gather, is a sort of fire event. If you're at a bar and there's a great fight on television, people are tuning in and watching that. But boxing created a long-term structural decline for itself through a series of economic decisions that included, we're going to try to milk as much money as we can as possible, a lot of mismatches at a lower level. A lot of times when people tune in, there's a BS decision. So you've watched something maybe for an hour and then you walk away feeling like there was just an injustice on one of the fighters. In the case of this Netflix event, boxing promotions have not learned from the UFC at all. They took over a half hour between the end of the co-main event and the main event of promos. They interviewed Logan Paul. They interviewed Rory McIlroy. They went through the celebrities in attendance. They went from the ringside desk to the upstairs desk, back to the ringside desk. And they didn't value the listener's time in any way. And also the co-main event in this case wasn't that great. And I think that in doing so, boxing refused to set up future stars in a way that people want to care about in a mass consumption way. And doing that over and over and over again is how you get to a point in 2025 where there is no boxing on linear television. Zero. This was the first time that happened since the 1940s. And the only events that are happening are on Netflix, which are just doing a few big events here and there. They have no long-term commitment to the sport. And I think it's not, I don't know if a real shame is the word to use, because I mean, there were things that made up for it. The UFC is more popular than ever. But when I look at how boxing created this economic problem for itself, which in my view is an economic problem, I think there's some reflections of the American economy in there.
My question to you is this a problem that can be solved by AI? I'm joking, but
yeah,
you know, there's a lot of industries that we talk about. Is this disruptable by AI? And as you're talking about all these structural declines, I'm thinking if ChatGPT can find a way to bring this thing back, I'm all for it.
I think it will be, I think it's going to be Dana White, unfortunately. And boxing fans are not a big fan of Dana White, but so maybe not big AI, but big Dana. He's going to start Zuffa boxing in 2026. And there's nothing really announced for it. But one of the things that he did with the UFC is he broke this model where in boxing, the most important thing is a fighter's record. So you end up having a lot of people who are 18-0, 25-0, but they've just been fighting cans their entire career. And they're not in competitive matchups, which being in a competitive I'm not a combat sports athlete, but being in a competitive matchup makes you ups your skill. And also competitive matchups are more interesting for fans to watch. Boxing refused to do that in a lot of cases in the lower levels. And he's saying, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to make telecasts more viewer friendly by not doing a expletive podcast in between the co-main event and the main event. And I think it can also be solved by having maybe higher level fights that are going on for 6 rounds. Because on a Netflix event, the co-main event, it was Alicia Baumgardner, and I forget who she fought, but it was a 12-round fight that was kind of boring. And when you have a 12-round fight that is kind of boring, that is an hour of your telecast, basically. And it's not something where people are like, I want to tune in early next time, or I want to see these women fight in their own main event. Now, I should caveat this. Jake Paul has been the greatest promoter of women's boxing. He set up main events between Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. They went to Madison Square Garden. That's great. But from watching that telecast earlier this year, this was a sport that was in denial of the full-blown crisis structural decline that it was in, and continued to do the same behaviors that got it to the point where it is no longer on linear television on a regular basis. That's the end of my rant.
So
we can go on to Vegas if you want.
The thing that I find interesting in there, you kind of, I never really gave it any thought, but I would say you educated me on this, was that the problem that boxing had was the over focus on undefeated fighters. Floyd Mayweather retiring 50-0 or whatever the heck he is, made the last 30 fights of his career predictable and boring. My favorite UFCer of all time, Chuck Liddell, lost 8 fights, but I would tune in and watch Chuck Liddell fight anybody, anywhere. And doesn't matter that he lost. So I'm with you. I think that actually makes a ton of sense. I don't know, again, that it brings it back. The reason I asked you that question that way was because the reason I wanted to do this show and have this conversation in the first place was that I have the opinion now, the informed opinion, that there tend to be these little nuggets of information letting you know that a recession is nigh, that if you're looking at them closely enough, they tell you something is coming. But if you just lump them together with everything else, or just personalize it and only focus on your own life in that moment, you don't really see it. And what I'm specifically referring to is when I was in college, I worked at Home Depot, and that was in 2007, right before the economic crisis really went into full storm. So maybe a year before it tipped into a full-scale recession or a great financial crisis. I was working at Home Depot. I'm responsible for assigning people's hours for the different departments and whatever. And one of the mandates that I keep getting from the store manager is like, hey, we need to scale back hours by 5 per person. We need to scale back hours by 10 per person. Our full-time people are only allowed to work 30 hours now. Our part-time people are not allowed to work more than 18 hours. And I was also working at the pro desk, which is the part of the store where the people actually doing the building and the big ticket items get purchased. The contractors that are building entire houses from scratch in some cases come and get special rock star treatment if they come through the pro desk versus just going through the store themselves like anybody else. And so the traffic there slowed down tremendously. And we're all standing around looking at each other and we're thinking, okay, well, the World Cup is happening. So maybe that's a big enough thing that it's drawing people away. Okay, well, there's this other existential factor that's happening. Maybe that's what's got everybody's attention. And then like 6, 7, 8 months go by and traffic doesn't pick up. It slows down. People are not getting laid off, but their hours are getting cut to a point where it becomes unsustainable, which ultimately is the reason that I left working there and went to work somewhere else. But it didn't really stand out to me as a thing that was reflective of the broader economy and was saying to me, hey, everybody out there in the housing space is feeling some sort of pain to the point they're no longer investing in those houses anymore. They're just trying to hold on to them. Maybe there's something happening and maybe, dare I say, there's some money to be made on the other side of this thing. Because I, at 19, had, I don't know, $10 in total to my name, right? If I didn't have a negative net worth. So I wouldn't have been able to profit from it anyway. But I constantly reflect on that as a moment that, as a person who at the time was studying economics, could have seen the bigger picture that was happening and really zoomed out and understood this one specific anecdote is actually attached to a much bigger, broader systemic issue.
There's a lot of truth to that. And also there's an idea that what you see in the economy is often undervalued by economists. The narratives that people tell about the economy are undervalued. It's a nascent field of economics that is hard to track, but nonetheless important for the stories you hear at a Home Depot desk or, the stories you hear from your friends at a bar, whether or not they're willing to buy a home right now. I'm going to bring it back to boxing for 3 seconds, and then I'll bring it back to this because I know you're ready to move on. The economic reflections from that I was trying to pull from that are that squeezing the customer and setting up a total winner-take-all system for now and now only created a long-term structural decline that is intensely difficult for boxing to get out of, and the business may not be able to get out of it and back to a place not of 1980s popularity, but as a regular part of American culture. So that was the economic point that I was making, and that's maybe the shadows that I'm trying to say may exist in the economy right now.
Well, you just described Las Vegas. So maybe that is the bigger, broader piece that boxing is attached to, for better or for worse, right? I know that fights happen everywhere. Less happen on the Vegas Strip as they used to. But boxing is attached to Las Vegas one way or another. And attendance in Vegas, foot traffic to Vegas, is down at a time where profits and growth and revenue are actually up for the region. And so I think that's indicative of the last time I was there. I think a year and a half ago, maybe it was sometime last year I was in Vegas, and a sandwich that should cost $10 is $15, $16. And people are still in line to pay it, but you're probably not going to come back. And so that means then that all the traffic that normally would come from, Macau, Beijing, other parts of Asia, Toronto, parts of Canada, New York City, DC, like other parts of the country that typically would make a big deal out of coming to Vegas, sometimes multiple times in the same month for certain people, like that decline could be indicative, that foot traffic decline could be indicative of people having less discretionary income and less willingness to come and play. Or maybe it's just because we all got a casino in our pocket now if we want it.
So I'm deciding where to disagree with you because you got a lot there. There is a sort of, we'll say Vegas is an economic constellation. Multiple forces are creating a little less foot traffic. And it's the type of thing where if you're on the Las Vegas Strip walking around at Wednesday at midnight, that place is still packed compared to like 99% of other American cities. So there was a report that room receipts, I think, were down about 14% from a year ago. There's reports that total attendance is down about 8% from a year ago. But if you go to Vegas, it's hard to track that decline, right? Because you're like, these places are still packed. People are still at the tables. It's just there's a little bit coming off the top, it seems. And the other piece of this is that gaming revenue is actually up 5% year on year on the Strip. So you could read all of these stories about how nobody goes to Vegas anymore, and you would think gaming revenue is going to be down. No, it's actually up. And there's a few potential reasons for that. I think the most salient, or to me, the most correct, are they've juiced the games even more. So they're putting things like 000 roulette out. If you're a lower level player, you're only getting 6 to 5 blackjack. So if you get a blackjack, you get paid less as the bonus. I'm not doing math on podcasts unless I have to. You know it if you know it. You don't need to know it if you don't need to know it.
000 roulette seems diabolical.
3 zeros on the roulette table. And there was a writer, Luke Winkie, from Slate. He wrote a really good long form piece about this. And he's just like, the casinos know that there's drunk frat bros walking around, and I watch them go play 000 roulette when there's a 000 roulette right next to them, and it made no difference. So why wouldn't they put it out there? And I think that that's interesting. So they've juiced it in a way where they're taking more from the little player, and they're also only they've always promoted whales coming in, but that's who they're primarily focusing on now is the whale. Your explanation that some of it is that there's a casino in my pocket, therefore people go to Vegas less often, I think is incorrect. I think having more widespread gambling attracts more people to the capital of gambling. You may bet on some sports when you're at home watching it on television, but it trains you that you can bet on sports. And why not go to the real destination for it, which is you can go watch the biggest sportsbook screens over at the Circa in downtown Las Vegas, or you have more friends that are gambling. Therefore, maybe a Vegas trip makes a little bit more sense. So I don't think it's as much of a replacement as you may think. I think it's those other two structural factors a little bit more.
I just like the way that you phrased, I'm trying to decide how I'm going to disagree with you. And I've been focused on how I'm going to steal that and repackage it in the new year. So sure. I didn't hear anything else you said just now.
Fair enough. We can move on to the next one, which I know you're very interested in. And there is one sort of way I will tie this together. And this is from the article by Winkie, Lost Vegas and Slate Business, Worth Your Time. And he talked to a showgirl who takes photos with people on the street and tries to collect tips. She said that in her 6 years of showgirling, it was her worst summer, and it felt like business was down for her by about 80%. But Malcolm, that's not the only place this is happening.
Well, I think you did tie that together seamlessly, because maybe the reason I'm not going to Vegas and gambling as much as I would have been willing to is if I got to cut one of my vices, if I'm a sugar daddy, I'm keeping my sugar baby.
And more sugar babies are saying that they are seeing a pullback in spending. This is the sugar baby recession from an article from Bustle. It talks about different stories of different sugar babies, and one including Morgan, who is a mid-20s escort and a former sugar baby. She said that lately she's seen a shift in what clients expect, saying, quote, they want the full girlfriend experience, but for less, end quote. And that for the first time, she's having people ask her for a payment plan, and that people are telling her about the cost of living crisis and trying to negotiate different prices for sexual services.
That's wild.
Malcolm, do you think this is like your experience at the Home Depot, where fewer people are coming in to buy home goods? Here you have someone who's an escort saying she may be seeing a similar thing.
Honestly, like I know this probably sounds a little crass to half the people who listen to this podcast, so forgive me to the 6 of you that this is just a complete turnoff to your ears. But I came across this headline reading Hannah's newsletter, actually, and somewhere toward the bottom half of the newsletter is this piece of it. And immediately that's what my brain tracked to, was like, is this me at the Home Depot in 2007? Where the canaries are chirping less and less because they're dying off, and there's something there. And so I'm reading this entire long form piece, and I was like impressed with how much they actually did a deep dive into this and interviewed people on both sides of this trade and whatever. But the fact that like this has become an inelastic good, I hate to say it that way, but that frankly is what we're talking about. It's a service being performed for a fee. So it's a good, it's an inelastic good. And in a environment where a lot of guys are admitting openly to the reporter, like, I would rather park my car and take public transportation to and fro to avoid having to cut off this subscription in my life. I would rather be uncomfortable and inconvenienced in all these other different ways to avoid having to no longer have this be part of my life. And now we're getting to a place where they're saying, I've cut everywhere else I could possibly cut. This is the last monthly fee that I can no longer afford, which I think is actually indicative of something.
Is paid sex an inelastic good? That means that people aren't price sensitive. And it seems like this is an area where people may be a little price sensitive because it's not like I'm getting real crass here. It's not like a medicine that you have to take or you die is an inelastic good.
That's where I would disagree with you. I think there are people walking around who feel like this is a medicine that I have to take or I'll die.
Yes, I agree with you, but there are ways you can trade down, right?
There's a reason
There's
though
different
that
service providers at different price points.
Well, I think that's
Are you doing this? Are you doing this on CNBC, by the way? Are you having this argument on CNBC?
I don't think this is an argument that CNBC is ready to platform. But I do think that like there is something actually there. Like if OnlyFans was publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, I would be interested to see where they are this year in comparison to 2023 and 2024. Like when we talk about that wealth effect, Bitcoin is down from its all-time highs down into the 80s right now. That has an impact on people. Nvidia's share price, Microsoft, all these other companies that were riding high for the last 3 years have traded down in the last couple of months. And I heard somebody, one of the last times I was on CNBC, point out that in her mind, there are a number of people who are running out of capacity to spend. And the last place they have to go tap is their investments. And so they're selling out of a lot of the things, the riskier things that retail investors own as that last gasp to try and cover the spread on all the other stuff. They got more month than they have money at this point, and they're trying to cover that gap without having to use credit, for example, to do it. And I think that there's probably some truth to that folds into this particular story.
The other piece of this, which is a question mark for me, is I think that you could write a story about how guys are trying to I don't know if not be nice is the right way to frame this, but like, I guess guys have always kind of been cheap. You could always find a section of guys who have been cheap when it comes to sex throughout any point in the economy. And when I looked through the subreddit r/sugar relationships, I saw a very popular post that was about the bowl full of cheap, broke men and how, the top comment on it was that sugaring used to be a premium thing, but now it's just full of these cheap, broke men. They can't afford an escort and they just want to take advantage of these young, innocent women who don't know how to set boundaries. And Malcolm, that was from 2 years ago. That wasn't from 2025. That wasn't from 2024. And so part of this is when I look at these economic stories, is this something that is rising now when we're getting some anecdotes? Or is this something where maybe and I'm not accusing the writer of doing this, but is the writer finding the right storyteller to fit this economic narrative?
Well, mind you, I said, if not for ChatGPT, we are in a recession 3 years ago. So maybe underneath the surface, anybody who's not touched by the AI trade, anybody who doesn't work in tech or doesn't work in finance or one of the other interrelated industries that has seen a downturn in their industry because of all the other stuff, the other extraneous factors that had the S&P 493 taking their medicine already, maybe that's the cause. And that wealth effect that I was describing only exists if you are working for one of the companies that's related and not if you don't.
So the writer of this article, Camille Sojit Petja, the title is "Even the Sugar Daddies Are Feeling the Squeeze." It's in the Bustle. It's in Bustle, which I think it was an interesting article. I appreciate the work they did on that. And I thought it ended in sort of a sweet place, which is that they found someone who was a sugar daddy and found himself sort of getting away from it through this eureka moment where he hooked up with a new friend. They initiated kissing each other with no money involved. And he said that he was just playing her a song on the guitar. And she just started kissing me randomly out of nowhere. I was like, wait, I don't need to provide money for you to like me. I just had to be myself. And I really liked that. There is there can be an ending to this, which is many young men, I think, were trained on sort of the transaction, that sex is transactional. Maybe they grew up with porn and OnlyFans. And if they get the right relationship, they can learn that you can find a romantic partner who's interested in you for you. You don't need a financial transaction to make it so.
This is one of those things that as I learn this part of the world or the zeitgeist even exists to begin with, and don't get me wrong, like prostitution's been around as long as we as human people has been around. But in this particular instance, the way this story is describing the commonality of this being like our culture, especially for younger people who are trying to find their forever person and have kind of just given up. It's like once a week or every other week that I come into contact with something like this. It's just like, I'm too old for this. I'm glad I'm married. Like this is just.
The other thing that is, I'm not trying to say we're doing an interesting podcast. I hope you're interested in it. But what I've realized through these economic forces, we've talked about some of the base desires of humans as a reflection of the current economy. Mm-hmm. We've talked about fighting, gambling, and sex. And what do those three forces say about the current economy? I hope you've gotten some takeaways from that. And the last one that I want to do is eating, because I think this is actually a real reflection of the consumer economy. And it was from Papa John's that basically said, in an earnings call, they said that fewer people are buying large pizzas with multiple toppings on it. They're buying more medium pizzas with fewer toppings on it. And to me, that is a real piece of economic data that says the consumer is feeling squeezed as we look out to this new year.
I find it fascinating that the pizza indicator made its way into this conversation, because I also think fast food is an indicator of, are we headed toward a recession or not? Like when I think back to 2007, once again, and 2008, everything became a meal deal. It was the $5 meal deal. It was the two can come and eat for $20 deal. It was all these different ways that they figured out to put together and package, come eat a cheap meal, a good meal here for cheap. And I'm seeing a lot more of that now, right? Like I've seen the commercials, the Chili's of the world and the Fridays of the world that are like, before you get ready to go to McDonald's and eat the same burger for slightly more, come here and have a meal. Come to Buffalo Wild Wings and have like 40 different courses for $12 or whatever the meal actually is. Like, I'm seeing a lot of those commercials as I watch football on Sundays. And I think that is also indicative of the companies now know it's out there, it's happening. Let us get ahead of it instead of being reactive to it.
There is a tremendous amount of promotional activity in the restaurant industry. And two things I think are interesting. One is the restaurants that I think will do well, the chain restaurants that will do well in this environment, are the ones who have a consistent value offering. I went to In-N-Out this weekend. If I could buy stock in In-N-Out, I would buy it and hold it for 50 years. People love In-N-Out. And even at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, that place is packed. And they don't do special deals at In-N-Out. You just know that you can get it in Colorado. You can get a double-double for $6.25. And it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be consistent. With Chili's, as you mentioned, 3 for me, $10. You can get a burger. You can get a side, burger, side, app, drink, I think. Is that more than 3? Anyway. That's 4. So burger, you can get entree, side, drink for $10. And they're able to say, hey, you can come here and get a consistently good meal for less money than you'll get at the McDonald's drive-thru. That's number one. Number two is the mistake that I think a lot of chain restaurants made, McDonald's in particular, which is that we're going to have an increased level of promotional activity on our app for our loyalty members, but then we're going to consistently raise menu prices. So we're going to force our customers to play the JCPenney. Hire me as a consultant, McDonald's. Don't do the same thing that Bed Bath & Beyond did, where you're trying to train your customers to constantly look for discounts or not eat or shop with you. And that seems to be what they're doing. I think it'll be a mistake. And both of these work. I do think it is a real sign of a consumer recession, though.
What's also ridiculous about this to me, specific to McDonald's, I've never owned stock in McDonald's. I probably will never own stock in McDonald's. But from the little bit that I understand their business model, the place they really make their money is the upfront fees they collect from would-be franchisees looking to open the next restaurant. So rather than making it harder to sell more burgers because you've turned people off and sent them to Chili's to get the exact same combo meal, but now they get to sit down with a better atmosphere and actually have a server and all that kind of, the components that go along with that to make you feel like you've done more, a better experience. I think that's what I'm supposed to say there. Like, now we're ceding ground because the thing that we could actually hang our hat on is like, we're cheaper, we're faster. You can come into the drive-thru, spend less money, and be out in 2 minutes. Well, if I'm going to spend more money and the milkshake machine is going to be broke every time I come, like, maybe I will just go to Chili's and I can order ahead on the app and they bring it out to my car anyway. So it's basically like I went through the drive-thru. So maybe we focus on keeping costs down and more about trying to help would-be franchisees get excited about opening that next restaurant so we can collect the $1 million up front and put shovels in the dirt to open the next restaurant, because you're really in the real estate business.
Yeah. And, as we wrap up here, the way people understand value, one of the most concrete examples of value is the food you get on a plate, the steak you get on a plate. Mm-hmm. And I think we should wrap up. If you've been watching this episode, you will have seen the Washington, D.C. sunset throughout our recording as it goes into evening time for Malcolm. I want to make sure he can get going as we take a little bit of a break for the holidays. And as you're listening, hope you're having a good start to the new year. Hope the holidays weren't too stressful for you. We've got a lot of great shows coming this year, and we're really trying to build this thing. So if you can, I would ask that you leave just a few sentences on Apple Podcasts. Leaving a review if you listen on Spotify, putting the 5 stars there really helps us out as we try to grow this thing. I'm at Rick So Slick on X, Ricky Mulvey on LinkedIn. That's the place where you can find me. And Malcolm is at Malcolm on Money. Thanks for joining us.
Information shared in this recording and by its guests represent the views and opinions of the guests and does not represent the views or opinions of the host. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This content is not, nor is it intended to be, a substitute for professional financial advice. It is always recommended that you seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your personal financial situation.